Hello, I'm your host John and welcome back to Japanese History for Gaijins. The last few episodes have been quite in-depth, so this episode we're going back to our roots of 5 episodes ago, and we're going to do some short but sweet, interesting parts of Japanese history. Last week, the Japanese imperial court left Nara after it was the capital for about 80 years. Why was this though? Well, I explained last episode that the main theory is to do with the Fujiwara and their attempt to limit the power of Buddhist institutions. This, indeed, definitely contributes to it, but there is another interesting theory that I read by the historian Ronald P. Toby. I'll put a link to the article in the description for those who are inclined to read the whole thing. However, his theory is based on something that I love to talk about: dynastic meddling, the core of any medieval political historian. Basically, families. As I said, we will do some social and economic episodes as well, but this is really interesting explanation as to why both the capitals keep moving around and why it ends up settling in a place that we now call Kyoto. In the end, it's all related to people, not the emperors, but the emperors' wives. What I've been hinting at for a while is that the imperial princes were very much supported by their mother's family. Remember, the male members of the royal family can have multiple wives. This meant that you could have competition, not just between different branches of the same family, but immense conflict just between the sons of the different mothers. This is also a trend that tends to appear in medieval Islamic society, as those rulers also had multiple wives, and therefore it was common to have a succession contested by multiple half-siblings. In Japan, it then runs its course of the families of these wives then being the power supporting their different nephews or cousins for the succession. This competitive succession also contributed to the move to Nara, as the succession after the death of the Emperor Tenji, formerly the Prince Nakano Oe, the super prince who did all the reforms and destroyed the Soga clan to boot. However, his son was displaced by Tenji's younger brother, who became the Emperor Temu. This is confusing, isn't it? Now, imagine how it must be for Japanese people. They have to work out the difference between John, Jack, Jake, James, Joe, Jim, Japan, whatever. The Emperor Temu was super into all these reforms, and it was his descendants who ended up moving to Nara. They were also part of the imperial family, super into Buddhism, so their donations and focus in Nara is understandable. Another important thing about Nara is it was still within the Yamato plain, where the imperial family traditionally held a lot of sway, whereas Kyoto is actually just a bit further to the north and more separate from the area. However, when the Emperor Shotoku died in 770, she had no children, and she left the throne to her distant cousin, the direct descendant of Tenji, who was still married into the Temu line. He became the Emperor Konin, not to be confused with the American talk show host and the Japanese child detective famous in the manga Case Closed. Originally, when Konin took the throne, he was in his 60s, so it was likely that the next emperor would soon be his son. Prince Charles can only dream. However, his son was Prince Osabe. Osabe was born of Konin and the daughter of one of the Temu emperors, so it would have been a perfect combination of the two family lines. However, Osabe and his mother were caught attempting to plot against the emperor for some reason, and they were both imprisoned and died a couple of years later. Conspiracy theory: what if it was the Fujiwara who framed them so they can move away from Nara so they could get more power? This has no evidence on it. This has no evidence to support it. It's just a theory. This is not good history. This meant that the next crown prince, who would also become the next emperor, would be the Emperor Kamu. Kamu's mother was actually descended from Korean immigrants, and therefore he had no link at all to the line of the Emperor Temu. This meant that when Kamu became emperor in 781, it didn't take a long time for him to want to move away from the place that he didn't really have any powers or supporters. He didn't move straight to where Kyoto is now, but to a different city that he ordered built, closer to the coast, called Nagaoka. However, after 10 years building here, For some unknown reason, the court then moved again to the location of the modern-day Kyoto. This unknown reason has been speculated to do with Buddhist and Shinto superstitions. I'm sure some conspiracy theories have linked it to aliens somehow. Simply, some kind of unfortunate event might have happened at this place whilst it was being built, and therefore they thought it better to move on instead of live in a place they then associated with misfortune. So Camus up and moved again, and boom, let's build a new city. For real this time. And they called it Heian. Aha. This is the city we now call Kyoto. Don't let that name fool you. This is because we are entering the Heian era. Heian literally means Heian, tranquility and peace, and capital, Kyo. It's a lovely name, isn't it? And the city buildings itself were based on those of the then Chinese capital, with an ordered and planned street layout that you can still see parts of to this day. The main reason that Camus probably moved up to this area was this was the power base of the Korean immigrants that had made up his mother's family, and it was also equally suitable for the Fujiwara family as they were to help him, and also start to get a bit more power hungry in the coming century. So it's now 806, and Camus dies, and guess what? He has multiple sons. That's not going to cause any trouble at all. Oh, also just imagine at this point the Fujiwara taking over everything. Their daughters are married to so many imperial princes, and they hold close to every position at court. A, because, it's a big family, and B, they know what they're doing. Camus' successor is his eldest son, Heizai. However, he abdicates just 3 years into his reign, possibly because of a debilitating illness, after which he moved back to Nara, and was known as the Emperor of Nara. This is not going to go badly at all. This leads to his younger brother becoming emperor, the Emperor Saga. However, Heizai and his wife then decided that they liked being emperor quite a lot, who'd have thought, and they decided to press their claim by force. Also, this wife of Heizai's was a Fujiwara, and one of her brothers joined them in this revolt. So not only did a civil war start between the royal family, but also within the Fujiwara family itself. This is all very exciting, but the rebellion was quickly put down. But if the Fujiwara love something, it's trouble, because that gives them a time to shine and gobble up more delicious power. So the emperor could talk to the chancellors and Fujiwara secretly to dispense orders. He created the Kurando, which literally means the treasury office. Essentially, it was a front through which the emperor could quickly and unofficially contact his ministers in times of trouble. The issue with this is that the Fujiwara took it and they ran with it. They sprinted with it. They marathoned with it, essentially using the position to spy upon the emperor and establish it as a permanent thing. It also allowed them to bypass most bureaucracy created by the Taika reforms and rule almost directly, because they could just say that anything they want had come through the secret channel, and it was the emperor's will. Also, the emperor can't really do anything about that because A, he's being spied on, and B, the rest of the government is owned by the Fujiwara. Whoopsie! Obviously, this office became super important, and it got the most metal name ever, the Toryumon, the Gateway of the Ascending Dragon. That's a band name right there. That's a banger of a band name. However, totally not Kyoto, but still Kyoto, was developing well and developed along the next 60 years or so, with the Fujiwara going from strength to strength. This is also the start of a slightly more peaceful era in Japanese history. The Heian era is well named. So the sudden changes of emperor are going to get slightly less obvious. Well, everything's going to be a bit more sneaky at least. Up until the 12th century. We'll do an entire episode on Kyoto and its growing culture, but what to really understand for this point in history is that the Fujiwara are the dominant force from this point onwards. They are the classic example of the strong getting stronger. It's a tale as old as time. We now begin what is known as the Fujiwara Regency, because in 858 the emperor is Emperor Seiwa, who is enthroned at the age of 8. He was probably chosen because he was the grandchild of the then head of the Fujiwara clan, Yoshifusa. Yoshifusa was also married to the Empress Saga's daughter. Don't try to think or look at a family tree. I did, and it made my brain want to crawl into a Jackson Pollock painting. Yoshifusa was given the title of regent. Well, he gave it to himself, or Sessho in the original Japanese, which has exactly the same connotations as the English one, being a temporary caretaker position. However, he held this title till his death in 872, when the emperor was 22. But then, it wasn't Yoshifusa's problem anymore, and his adopted son, who was actually his nephew, became the next regent, and this was Fujiwara Mototsune. Of course, there is an issue with being regent. It's not going to last forever. No problem, thought Mototsune. I'll just create the title of Kampaku, or Kampaku. It essentially means chief advisor to the emperor, but that's just window dressing. Delicious, delicious window dressing. Essentially, with a mix of Sessho and Kampaku, the Fujiwara family would directly rule Japan for the next 300 years. Of course, there is conflict and emperors who resent this control, but those are stories for another time. Instead, I will leave you with the misadventures of Emperor Seiwa's son, because Seiwa decided being a controlled emperor was kinda boring, so he decided to abdicate in 876, leaving his young son to become emperor. This was the Emperor Yosei, who was emperor from the age of 8 to 15, but he lived until the age of 80. The reason Yosei was forced to abdicate when he was 15 becomes quite obvious when you look at the historical records. All these stories, by the way, come from some of the official records from the Annals of the Emperors of Japan, which was written by a Dutch trader and scholar in the 19th century. Well, translated is probably a better phrase. So take that at face value, but basically, this is a classic case of a pure serial killer. Yeah, this has become a true crime podcast for the next 3 minutes. I will now read the extracts in English. In his earliest teens, Yosei often spent time alone, and sometimes he would feed live frogs to snakes so that he could watch the reptiles swallowing, or sometimes he would find pleasure in setting dogs and monkeys to fight. In time, these amusements became more dangerous. He himself executed criminals, then he became angry. He sometimes chased after those who dared speak up, and he sometimes tried to use his sword. Now, I love a dog and monkey fight as much as the next person. Not when I'm 14 years old. And just remember that even killing animals is extremely polluting in Shinto and Buddhism, and thus even actions like this would seem justifiable to depose the emperor, as he, I will reiterate this, is supposed to be the embodiment of the spiritual well-being of the country. And it's going to get worse. An extract from the next year tells us, the extravagant and dangerous habits of the emperor continued unabated. At one point, Mototsune came to the court and discovered that Yosei had arranged a bizarre scenario for his diversion. He ordered some men to climb high into trees, and then he ordered others to use sharp lances to poke at those men in trees until they fell to their deaths. This extraordinary event convinced Mototsune that the emperor was too undignified to reign. That is one word for it. Another word for it is bat-crazy insane. There are even rumours of the emperor going around murdering courtiers at the age of 15. This is maybe a perfect example of why you shouldn't marry your sisters. Mototsune then realised that he had to get the Emperor Yosei out of the palace so he could be easily dethroned, so that the Imperial Guards wouldn't interfere. I'm wondering how many guards the Emperor Yosei would have left after he turned some into pincushions, but hey, history. So Mototsune challenged the young emperor to a horse race. The emperor accepted and left the palace to go and start the race. But the Fujiwara men came upon him, and Yosei was forced to give up the throne there and then. But even when this emperor was retired, he didn't give up. And I will end the episode here with Yose's activities in his 20s. The former Emperor Yose was newly attacked by the mental illness. Yose would enter the palace and address courtiers he would meet with the greatest rudeness. He became increasingly furious. He garroted women with the strings of musical instruments and then threw their bodies into a lake. While riding on horseback, he directed his mount to run over people. Sometimes he simply disappeared into the mountains, where he chased wild boar and sika deer, which in the Shinto cosmology were considered to be messengers of the gods. This man lived to be 80 years old. Remember also that killing one of those deer were punishable by death for another 800 years. Oh, also the strangling women with guitar strings, and then essentially playing Grand Theft Auto Horse in real life. This man could have been emperor for 72 years. I think Japan dodged a bullet on that one. Anyway, that's enough of crazy emperors for this week. Hopefully things will get better for the royal family next week, but I wouldn't hold too much hope. That's all from me. Arigato gozaimashita for listening. Madaraishu, I think I need to lie down after that. Bye.